Hello.
Welcome back to the Alexander Schmidt Podcast, episode 56, Contemporary Conversation 6, Westworld Season 2, Episode 6, Phase Space. Mr. Babcock, how are you?
I'm fine, Mr. Schmidt. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm having finals week this week with the students, so it's a fairly easy week for me. Lots of grading, but not a lot of high-energy lecturing.
I'm in the same boat.
Oh, well, that's wonderful to hear. I spent some time today hitting a 28-mile bike ride.
Oh, that sounds good.
And then hitting some stairs. I was inspired by your recent fitness exploits. If the listeners don't know, Mr. Daniel Babcock is not only teacher extraordinaire and podcast analysis guru, but also a recent half marathon finisher on Saturday.
Yes, it was my third half marathon and my best time yet, so that was exciting.
Oh, wow. What was your time?
1 hour and 36 minutes.
Pretty impressive. Good use of a couple hours. All right, well, let's dive in here. So I was looking up the word phase because I had an inkling that it went back to through the Latin to the Greek, and from the word phasis or phanein, which means to make appear or to appear in a certain way. And often the word phase, until even 1841 in Latin, was used to indicate phases of the moon. And the moon at night indicates the time in nature when things grow and change without you noticing. And so that which appears one way might well be another. And this might also indicate a time of transformation. And so I was wondering how that might apply to the show that we watched, phase space, like a time when things appear in some way and perhaps are another. And the first thing that popped into my head was when we go inside what is called the cradle, like where a baby is, or a new creation, which is the hard line network of all the soul minds of the hosts that contains their original sort of code. So it's sort of like a genealogical tree of consciousness, or like an Yggdrasil, like a world tree, an axis mundi. And in there we found, well, who other than who we thought we might find distributed throughout the consciousnesses of the hosts, Dr. Robert Ford.
Of course.
And so, as we have been suspecting all along, he in some way is present there. And so, just to connect that to two things, the very first scene we have when we are watching this Westworld is that though we thought Arnold or Bernard was testing Dolores for consciousness in those scenes where they were sitting down and talking to each other, it turns out Dolores has been conducting those research sessions in order to test for the fidelity of Bernard or Arnold in the same way that the Man in Black was doing with the Delos father-in-law. And just the third thing is that with the Man in Black meeting his daughter and not believing that she was actually his daughter, Emily, but rather a host, it's now sort of cast into doubt precisely where the line is between who we can and cannot doubt as host and
which is
actual
everybody.
Right. It has taken on sort of a Truman Show aspect where we are no longer in the... So as viewers, it's a very interesting moment, right? Because we are no longer in the omniscient know. We never knew everything, but we did know that we were the viewers in the audience and the magician was on the stage. But now we're in the position of not knowing the difference between the magician and the stage. And I don't know even how to complete the metaphor. Things have gotten jumbled. We no longer even know. I mean, I think it's appropriate even to question, I don't mean to be conspiracy theory about this, whether any of the people we know that we have seen in this park are hosts or humans. Because some could still be humans, and this could all be a major simulation in order to still prove, what could be happening or what the fallout of this could be before production even happens or something like that. If they wanted to go full Matrix, you might say.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that because I don't know what the realm that Bernard enters is when he puts his mind into the cradle. Like, is this supposed to be
I think it's
like
supposed to be archetypal reality.
okay,
That's where all the perfect stories are played out all the time, and where the where the root stories are kept. So keeping with that tree metaphor,
okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
where everything goes sort of according to plan, because that's where the plan is stored. And so
yeah,
it's like like the saying, I think it's from Matthew, that the kingdom of heaven is all around us, but we don't see it. That this
yeah,
is sort of the ideal plan that's supposed to be played out in the actual Westworld, but the devil gets into us. Some impulse takes over, or usually a human will come in and shoot, or make away with whatever character he or she wants to introduce chaos into the situation and thus ruin the ideal plan. So actually, I do think this is even more heavenly now. Not only does it have the God the Father figure in there, who's now actually the redeemed Son because he died in reality, and so he's like a Jesus son figure
hmm
now too, and God the Father, which is very Miltonian and interesting. But also, it's not contaminated with the humans who make all the evil choices, who have made a prison of made a prison of their own sins of actual Westworld, which has now become a harbinger of death, and is through the figure of Dolores largely become the Grim Reaper that is sowing exactly what they, or is reaping what they sowed.
yeah. Now I'm
Uh,
wondering, we'll discover, I'm sure, in coming episodes, but like, if Bernard slash Arnold, whatever he's supposed to be now, and Ford interact with a host in that code, would that change their base code? So is this the way that Ford would be able to manipulate, as you say?
well, so just something on that. I don't know about the base code idea, but that's a really great idea because we have seen that sort of thing happen, right? When Maeve had seen her stats and yet had not realized that she was still within a narrative written for her. But Ford was alive at that time,
Yeah.
but he still could have pulled that sort of tricky thing because he's so smart, or at least we're led to believe that he's essentially omniscient, far more omniscient than we are. He knows the next play, we don't. And but sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Thing going on that diversion. What was it we were just saying? Babcock.
Can he can
Oh yes,
he manipulate the code? Is that how he manipulates code? Is by interacting with the source?
I think her name is. What is the name of the agent who is the coder who Bernard
Oh
makes
gosh,
through sheer
I'll find it real
skill?
quick.
You would be the one.
Ellie.
Ellie. That sounds right. Right. And so she makes a comment that even though she can see what's happening in the cradle, that it appears to be improvising, as if it is conscious and can react. And I would say that's sort of like the joy of jazz, right? That that you have a conscious agent in front of you because they are riffing, because they're improvising right in front of you. And that's sort of what we like about live shows, even if they're highly practiced, right? Like this person could mess up in front of us and it would be a big deal. So improvisation seems to be an indication of agency, which was another big word in this this episode. Dolores' big word, agency, which comes from Latin word ago, egere, egi, actum, which is where we get the word. It means to go or to lead, but agens, like agent, but also actum, where we get the word act, and also actor. So like the idea is that, your actions are how you are perceived, or how that all people are an actor. And insofar as you act a certain way, that is the way you are. Sort of Aristotelian notion behind that word, I would say. Which is certainly true in Westworld, right? Because everybody has their different roles. And it seems as if this is a phase space, if this is a time of growth and transformation, everybody's roles are going to change again. I'm very interested to see exactly what that means because, well, is Bernard is now, I mean, I don't really know how far to go with this, but if Dolores is testing Bernard to be like Arnold and it appears as if in the most future time, Bernard is not recognized as a host, but rather as a human. Was Dolores training him in order to have him as a mole within the organization? Is he secretly working for her with or without his own knowledge?
I'm not sure how to take that. I'm not sure if this is Ford interacting through Dolores, if this is Dolores on her own, if this is before any of this happens, if this is after. I have no idea. This episode was very disorienting.
Yes, and and it's funny that you say disorienting, because that was something we got that through a shock in the narrative too. Even I think we all knew that the Japanese storyline and the Westworld storyline, those two sets of characters who are identical to each other, the Ronin Musashi and Akane and Hector and his band and Maeve, we all knew that they couldn't stay together, even though it would have seemed so cool. They all have to occupy, their own specific dominance hierarchies where they're made to do it. And so,
except for, of course, the two dragon tattoo women who are sort of linked together now, and they're like one person in a way.
Yeah, so they're interesting because they seem to be sort of a symbol now of heaven and earth joined. And so I think they might be doing something different. So I think that's a really good note that you have there. But it seems like Musashi and Akane are staying at that lake in order to try and find peace. And it's very interesting because I was talking with Wes yesterday about Howl's Moving Castle, and that sort of the message seems to be, in order to bring peace to the world, you have to first find inner peace. And that's actually, a religious idea in Islam in terms of the greater versus the lesser jihad, in Taoism, in riding the line between chaos and order, and also, of course, in Buddhism and in Christianity, the idea is inner harmony. Even in yogic chakra ideas, having all the chakras aligned. So inner harmony doesn't seem to be a small deal. And so, my gosh, going off on that major amplification, that's always such a big deal. It always leads me astray.
Uh-huh.
What am I answering, Babcock? I can't believe I did that.
The question of why the two groups cannot be one, right? So why Musashi and Akane cannot stay with.
So what they're going to do is stay and fight, but they're not. They're staying to fight in order to protect something, in order to bind themselves to something, in order to be responsible for something, and thus bring out something beautiful within them. It's sort of like what it was represented in fighting for Sakura, her daughter, in order to protect. Instead of protecting her, she's going to now protect something that symbolizes her, and thus continue to embody the responsible and noble soul that a human can have when they fight for something they love.
Yeah, it's interesting that they paired that scene where she says, "We'll stay here, we'll fight for our home. If you don't have your home, then you don't have anything." And when Maeve returns home, she's affected by this, right? She wants to go off on her own. She says, "I know this place. I don't need to." She's smelling like she's surrounded by the sensory details of this place, and the home is the centering force for her. And I'm kind of wondering if, because the daughter relationship is undone for her, it's not the actual source of transcendence because the daughter has been rewritten into a new narrative with a new mother, that it's the true thing that she was looking for is the home. And that then makes me wonder, is that the key to what the hosts are looking for is a home? Like, what is Dolores' end result? I don't know. I don't know what she's going for. Like, where can these hosts be? Like, where is the place where they could be free and be who they want to be?
It does seem like that place would have to be Westworld, and there would have to be some agreement that they came to with the people that they could interact in some sort of free way. But yeah, that does seem to be the ultimate outcome of choice, one's individual choice to make a home, to bind oneself to a purpose and a place, and thus the tragedy and the fate of that place too, right?
Yeah.
Because you only really fight for a place when your destiny is intertwined with it, which is the idea being the captain goes down with the ship, and why Hector, goes down before Troy goes down. That you are only truly free when you freely bind yourself to something, because then you are most able to express the person you really are. And that's, I think, why they call the Ronin scum, who are unattached.
Because they don't have connection.
Right, they have all the skill of the samurai, but they have none of the motivating factor, none of the noble aim of them. So they're like a shadow version of an empty ghost animated armor set. They're missing the soul or the whole purpose.
Yeah.
Right. And so the ultimate purpose seems to be sort of like God on the cross, the notion of Jesus, and I would say even in the Hindu gods who come to an end as well, that in accepting limitation and death and the tragedy of existence, you bring the best out of yourself, but you in accepting death, you are motivated to live your life in the way most appropriate to bring out a death in line with the way you wish to live and the person you wish to be and end as. Because you can't get away from death. And even the god in Westworld has died and set the model. Ford.
Yes. And he's dispersed his soul into the place in its most perfect sense, in its most abstract sense, in its
right. And I think the most interesting thing about that, and I'd say it's the major difference between, say, Judaism and Christianity, is that then he's not just the story, the dead tradition, but the active improviser, the logos, the consciousness, which continues to change and bring meaning and purpose to things. That it's and that's even something that he said earlier, right? That he what was the comment from the very first season when he's talking to the Delos agent? He said that he's not very, I think it was nostalgic, and he was just about to tear down her childhood favorite restaurant where they had just
remember that
in her favorite seat. Well, he made a comment suggesting that he'll change everything. He doesn't mind because he's sort of a demiurgic figure as well as a logos-like figure at that point. Like whatever he decides happens. Which I would say is sort of the idea of the logos, in that it cuts through the potential in order to sort of construct through whittling away a reality.
It's interesting. He's like a I mean, I'm thinking of Solon. I'm thinking of Lycurgus. I'm thinking of the the rule bringer, the law bringer who has to leave the people. But they the idea is that was it Lycurgus or Solon who said that the laws have to be written on the hearts of men or something like this?
It was Lycurgus.
Yeah, but
that's a very Spartan statement.
Yeah, I was just going to say that sounds like a Spartan thing to say. But and so that's clearly what's going on here, in that he is in the code, which is both the cerebrum and also seemingly the heart. If we look at the Akane Sakura storyline,
that was rad.
But he's more than just on their hearts. Like, he apparently now is an active. I don't know if living is the right word, but a person. He's alive. He exists more than.
He's a force.
What's that?
He's a force. He has a personality. Just something interesting is that the first scene we see Dolores in this episode, she's playing the piano, and this is where we get new upgraded Teddy, or perhaps, and I do want to talk about a couple things there, where that he makes that little comment to her about how she's like, you never used to like this place, and he's like, I do now. You must fix that too. And it's like, ooh, a little bit of resentment.
Yeah.
He also enters in and says, well, let's get moving, and then shoots the guy without being told by Dolores. So he's still sort of disobedient, but now to the opposite extreme, which is interesting. But now I'm thinking all about Teddy. I'm sorry. I can't get off
Ford's animating purpose.
Not only does Dolores play the piano, which is something that we see happening in the intro, and then eventually we see the keys moving by themselves. And so then we also see Ford playing the piano when we're first introduced to him again. So we have that sort of triple theme, and I really thought it was interesting, the notion. And a big question from the first season was the piano animated? Was it just playing recordings, or did it play itself? Was it conscious? And so in the intro, the fingers of the skeletal host come off the piano and it starts to play itself, as if the harmony has taken over.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that seems to be the idea behind the demiurgic sort of Ford or Arnold moving away from the creation, so that it can fill the space itself, so that it can become conscious itself, so that it can play its own harmony, so that it can harmonize, so that it can improvise.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what seems to be happening now. And I think that might be the connection between Dolores playing the piano, or one of the connections between Dolores playing the piano and him playing the piano. I think it also draws sort of a line between them, suggesting that there's perhaps a relationship that we haven't considered before, because we haven't seen them interact a ton with each other. Dolores seems to have been the pet project of Arnold,
yeah.
but we don't.
But he seemed to have known that she was I mean, like he wrote the narrative for her to be the one to start the revolution, right? He knew that Dolores was special for Arnold, and that was also 30. He had 30 years to think about Dolores killing Arnold, right?
Right.
So I mean, in the interregnum, he must have, studied her. We just haven't seen it. We just didn't get to see that.
Right.
Yeah. Now, the player piano is interesting. It makes me think about something that might be too tangential, but Vladimir Nabokov, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So his most famous novel, Lolita. There are these moments. I remember watching a lecture talk about this novel. There are these moments in the novel where it feels like, and it made this phrase makes the study of postmodern literature very clear to me, or really any modern literature in which you can sort of see the strings of the author, but that there are these moments where the author pulses through the fabric of fiction in these key little moments. So, for example, in the novel Lolita, it starts with a letter written by a psychologist or psychiatrist about this character Humbert and how he is X, Y, or Z, and it's supposed to be a foreword, and you're supposed to think that this is like a real person writing about the character Humbert, but of course this is false. This is all part of Nabokov's fiction. So his fiction starts well before other writers begin, and there's several other moments in the novel where he's exactly.
You have to exist in a liminal space as a viewer, as a reader, because you don't know what's happening exactly. Is this an actual expert? Is this the writer pretending to be an expert, and this is part of the narrative? Was I supposed to notice this?
Correct.
Is this just kind of laid out in here so that I kind of read and not even ask this question and just sort of feel uneasy, and then just sort of have this information half unrecognized in the back of my head the entire time I'm reading this book?
Yeah, exactly. And then throughout, he has set you up exactly in the way you just described, that he's trying to get you to question the very nature of the fiction itself, rather than just the fiction of the story, right? So rather than questioning Humbert, who's a pedophile, you should be questioning the relationship between you, the reader, and Nabokov, the author. So now I don't want to go full-blown postmodern meta-narrative analysis for the writers of the show, but let's think about Ford as an author, and he's placing his access points or his pulse marks or his fingerprints in various places, and I think that what you're pointing to, the player piano, might be the key point that the creators of the show are trying to draw, is that the player piano, which is the thing that is played by this host, which in this episode now we're questioning who, maybe they're all hosts, it could be, but then it begins to, as you say, play itself. The harmony plays itself. The story plays itself after the instigation. All it takes is the first sort of act of Dolores killing forward, and then the rest just sort of plays itself out like a player piano. The harmony plays itself out.
That's right. I think that that's the idea of God resting on the seventh day, so that now with consciousness ascended into man and him making his own choices, now he can sort of guide his storyline, which is an idea even brought forward in the show Vikings by Ragnar Lothbrok, who's one of the great kings of the Viking people. But just to show that the idea exists throughout cultures and different narratives, that the ultimate gift a human has is to choose his own fate. And boom, isn't that one of the big themes in this episode, where Maeve says she will not use her magic, which is still working very much well, her capacity just to give orders through her mind that will have people even kill their friends and then themselves. That's working fine. But in this dominance dispute between Musashi, who finally gets a legitimate crack at the his betraying lieutenant, who is now captain, well, he gets to disarm him literally, and then gets to give him I think it's called a wakizashi or a wazakashi, the something like that. I'm sure I'm embarrassing myself by trying. And
Harikari?
No. Well, I was talking about the sort of knife that's then used.
Right. Yeah.
For
that is wazaka, something like that. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was a Wachowski brothers, and yeah, so he gets to have him cut off his own head, and so I guess that's even better than, or to disembowel himself, and then he cuts off his head, and I guess that's even better than making him eat his words, but is essentially the symbol for making somebody eat their words. But she says that everybody gets a chance to choose their own fate, or deserves to, keeping her libertarian sort of tendencies there, or her ideas, maybe like wisdom embodied. And so having been a maven, or say a prostitute or a whore, she would also be embodied like Rahab, and also the Mary sort of Magdalene, and by some interpretations Mary perspective of even the lowest whore embodies nature and is thus a goddess, or embodies the goddess. And Maeve seems to have that wisdom, that which is interesting, because she talks not only about choosing one's own fate, but then she's told later by the Ghost Nation tribesman, but he seems to be a chieftain who we've seen before, that their fates are linked.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about that. What does that
Your
mean?
fate is hell. Well, it's interesting because it sounded like it was like an invitation, like he wasn't going to just kill her.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking exactly.
It didn't. It sounded like he might have had access to some information that she would have done well to glean from him, but that she was so terrified and traumatized from the last time things went down that she was sort of out of her mind.
So he says, you're right. He says, hold on, I'm just pulling the scene up. He says, we are meant for the same path. And then she says, your path leads to hell. So, she's been in hell, right? If we look back at the Dante map, she should be out of hell now. But is hell is hell, not to use.
Well, you can always return to hell. You can always return to hell by sinning, essentially. Okay. If you consider Dante's map sort of a map of living, right, and how to be, insofar as you're following your narrative perfectly and embodying, all the virtues and stuff, you're doing well. But each time you sin, boom, you're down in that hell for a certain amount of time.
So is her sin? So is her sin fearing the Lakota, the Ghost Nation?
Here I would say she's saying that his path leads to hell. Yeah. So it makes me wonder what she thinks he thought he was going to do with her, or what she thought he wanted to do. Because, was she just angry at him from the last time she had seen him, or did she actually believe that?
Or does she
because
think...
it seems like...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go on.
Does she think... So when he says our paths are bound together, we have this narrative together that is where I kill you, right? That's the narrative that's been written. And he says our paths are bound together, you cannot break from it. And she's saying, no, I have broken from it, because that is just hell. I'm out of hell.
That's an interesting.
But
So
but he
that's
still
interesting.
doesn't seem aggressive when he says it. It's not a.
No,
Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, and leads to hell. It just makes me wonder where it is that he thought, or she thought that he thought they would go.
Yeah.
Because it's not your path is hell. It leads to hell.
Yeah.
And so I'm just not sure what she thought he had in mind.
And he's the same guy that
whether
said
she was correct.
to the
Yes.
Hemsworth brother, you know, you only live as long as the last person who remembers you. So I think this
Right.
Ghost Nation, I think Ford is using them for something.
We gotta find out some more about them. We need to send somebody into there and into their tribe and get some information out of them. Have a, you know, they need to have some sort of awesome, well shot ritual.
Yeah.
And let us know some like wisdom of the gods.
Yeah, you know,
And-
if I were a writer, I'd have the Man in Black's daughter spend some time with the Ghost Nation and
Yeah,
become
so
one
that's
with them.
So that's a big question for me right now, and I think we might have to close on this because I know it's getting late for you over there. Is this Emily character, this man in the black hats, or Edward's daughter? Is she actually a daughter? Or Williams, excuse me. I'm thinking of his actual name, Ed Harris, the actor's name.
Yeah.
And
Is she his actual daughter or a host?
Is she a host? And is he potentially a host? Because who got that information wrong when he was like, I remember you were afraid of the elephants, and she said, no, I love the elephants.
It was Mother,
so
yeah.
Who failed the fidelity test
Yeah,
there? Was he right?
Or
Or was she
I
right?
didn't think about that. Now, here's a quick non sequitur. I'm just realizing host is what they're called. Right?
Yes.
So like a host as in like the soul could go into the body. Like the host could be the
Yes.
mechanical, but I never have thought of it. I guess now that that's a possibility, I'm just thinking of them like that. I used to think of them as hosts as like because they're the hosts because the guests were the ones who came into their house.
Host is an interesting word too, and like the guest host relationship is represented by the word xenia, from which we get xenophobic.
I was actually going to ask you that earlier.
Yeah, and so that's the holiest relationship protected both by Hermes of travelers and Zeus of strangers.
Course, yes.
And so holiest of holy. And in fact, there's a very similar myth. I forget the names. I think I always it's Baucis and Philemon. There we go. Who they entertain Hermes and Zeus, or Mercury and Jupiter in this case, and then are told, well, you know, that's good because your city, they didn't show us any hospitality, and we're going to burn them to the ground tomorrow. You know, that's just like the Sodom and Gomorrah.
I was just going to say, that sounds a little familiar.
It's the exact same story, right? And so, like, the idea is that hosts need to act right for civilization to work. And also, the heavenly host is that which casts down Satan's armies in Milton. And even the idea of host in virology is the thing which, you know, provides the seed of life for the virus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also, there's when you are the host, you are the governing force of the arrangement of an evening, right?
Yeah.
Like you are at the head of the table, you make all the things happen, and so host strikes me as the soul, right? The thing under which all the passions are subsumed. Ideally.
But the guest goes into you, right? Like in the guest-host relationship, the guest enters the host's house. Like if we were talking about what's it?
Yes, they enter and then two become one. The idea is that the distinction between stranger and friend is supposed to be dissolved when they come into your house. And so they become one with you.
Well, that definitely
sort of
makes
like,
sense because the host cannot achieve consciousness without humans. Because without humans, they would just be what they are in the ideal world in the cradle, right?
Nobody would have induced enough suffering on them for them to have become conscious.
Yeah.
And so we were so brutal that we sped up the work of nature so that they didn't just have to rely on tragedy. So since we can be so consciously brutal, we were like the ultimate tools of the evolution of consciousness.
consciousness steroids.
Yeah, consciousness steroids. That's precisely what we did. We sped up the process. It's like, man, we're some evil primates. It's like, well, we're the only evil primates, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're the only creatures that can be good and evil.
Yeah.
And it's like, we should remember what Ford said about the fact that we can be good and maybe not. I mean, definitely see the evil within ourselves. And I think Westworld's supposed to help us with that, right?
Yeah.
That it's like, man, look at us all being like, kill those hosts. They don't have rights. Do whatever you want. Westworld sounds fun. And it's like Westworld's, a major commentary on it. It's like, well, would that trap you within a prison of your own sins, thinking that way? And, you're watching this representation of this, and that's sort of like the same thing, but not as fun. And you're not as, even rich enough to get into a place like that. And so it's like, maybe the process by which the hosts come to consciousness through enduring suffering induced by man, well, maybe you're supposed to endure the suffering necessary to recognize your own limitations and your own sort of vicious and behaviors where you fell beneath the character you would wish to embody in a story where you are the sole author of your fate.
Sometimes a little pain goes a long way.
Yeah, and I mean, especially if it's like, who's going to save you? Day 7, it's you.
Yeah.
And that strikes me as like why football is played on Sunday too. It's like, who's going to win it? It's got to be you. And it's like,
that's good.
Well, then you have ultimate responsibility for your life. No ideology, no group identification will ever set you up again after you realize that. You have to boldly go where no one has gone before. You have to take the path less traveled. You have to go out beyond the group in order to bring them towards you, because now you're conscious. And, well, then you're your own person.
Now what, so is it Emily? What is the Man in Black's daughter's name? I think it's Emily.
Yes, Emily.
So he says, so I found this interesting that, she comes up to him and says, okay, my goal is to get you to come out, and that will be a step in the right direction to try to rebuild our relationship.
Right.
And, as a viewer, knowing what Ford is trying to say in his sort of cryptic way, is that this is the solution to the door, right? The way forward is the way backwards. You need to
right.
You need to rebuild relationships with actual people. You need to with human people.
That was our original idea. Yeah, that was our idea last week.
Yeah.
That's like, can he beat this game and win the meta game?
Yeah.
But he seems to be thinking
not the answer. Yeah.
That this is just like a coward's way out, or just a diversion put out there by Ford. Whereas perhaps, so I'm still like 50-50 on that, I would say. I don't know whether he is just deluded by the game at this point and is missing what is real. I don't know whether he himself is a host. So I guess I'm 33.
Mm-hmm.
Though I'd say that second interpretation is weaker. And I don't know whether she's a host, and that really was supposed to be a test for him.
Yeah.
Excuse me, sort of like in Total Recall.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
When Arnold's character is told, hey, this is a delusional fantasy, and you're having an episode, and
but then he embraces
you need to come
right?
out.
Yeah.
Right, but then he embraces it, and he still becomes the hero. And so it seems like that had been a diversion or a diversionary tactic. And so maybe the Man in Black was right, but well, Ed Harris really showed some range of acting there. Him asking if they could be square. I thought we were about to lose the Man in Black, and I was so happy to see him just get immediately back to his treacherous ways and just abandon her.
I was thinking the same thing. It's like, I was thinking if he does that, then obviously the next scene is going to be one of them is going to die, of course, right?
Right.
Or
right.
You're going to learn, right, exactly what you say, that she's really just a host and he's been tricked again. But his abandoning of her, again, just makes me wonder what, I don't know. Like that to me was the end of the arc, right? That's the traditionally that would be the melodrama would be, then he goes with his daughter or she dies, one of the two. But they just totally subverted that, and I have no idea what to expect next.
It's interesting too because it's like just as Maeve is coming closer to her daughter and doing everything she can to get to her, and just as Akane is showing like the utmost sadness at losing her daughter, the man in black is just all too quick to dismiss the existence of his
Yeah.
daughter and ride off away from her. So it is as if he has not learned a major lesson that even the hosts have begun to really learn.
Which is the binding of the father and or the child and the parent.
Which is that yes, that some things are worth dying for,
Yeah.
and binding your fate to.
Well,
and
okay. I think he thinks something is worth dying for, but I think that thing.
But he doesn't know what it is.
Correct.
He doesn't know that it's actually like pre-packaged in the whole human deal.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
Kids.
Yeah.
And that I do think, at least right now, I'm tilting towards he might have to suffer some serious emotional suffering before he dies to really have the game, because the ultimate game is one of the ultimate games is between him and Robert, and ultimately he needs to see in himself what Robert has seen in him the whole time, which has enabled Robert to perfectly, or to make narratives so good that he stayed enthralled with them for over 30 years, right?
Yeah.
Robert must have perfect insight into this guy's character to have kept him on the hook, which suggests also the idea of, the consciousness within you, the logos, or the Jesus in your heart, as Paul would say, that which sees everything you do and takes account. You can't lie to yourself. And sorry, something in my throat. So I'm going to have to listen for a while after this and maybe clear it. But sorry, not lecturing as much today, so it's strain on my voice. No, it's not.
So the Man in Black's pursuit of the door seems to be something that his desire for whatever his consciousness would be, whatever his perfect self that he's looking for. Go ahead.
Potentially misguided because the maze is within for him.
Right, I agree.
He just needs to look to his own choices.
Yeah, it seems like it's misguided, but I do. What makes me think it's misguided is the idea that he says that you're just a thing, or you're not a thing. You're a mirror. You're a reflection. So he knows that it's something about himself, and he doesn't see the value in another person being that reflection. So he didn't. He was angry about Dolores and what she became for him. He's angry about his child, which is also a reflection, which is also a mirror. He's angry that she's reflecting back at him what he is. So I don't know what the door could be for him. I'm thinking potentially it's if we saw him testing off this theory of Logan becoming immortal through the hosts. Is he trying to basically achieve what Ford has achieved, and is that going to be his door? Is he going to try to take his brain out of his head, and then he will maybe have to make a choice, kind of like in what was that episode of Black Mirror where the two women had started a relationship in that immortal afterlife. What is it called? San Andreas, San Bernardino,
it was San something.
Yeah.
It's a party town.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm wondering if he will be forced with, like we said before, we're not really interested in making plot predictions, but that seems to be something that he's looking for.
I would say maybe even one of those creepy Beetlejuice or Bill and Ted-esque sort of, or Scrooge, A Christmas Tale sort of retrospectives set up, potentially a situation that was terrible, where he has to relive something, like his wife's suicide,
or killing Maeve's child, or whatever it is. Yeah, right.
Yeah, something set up where he's put in a situation where he has to change a decision now that he made in the past, or recognize something he did, or recognize that every terrible thing he's ever done in the park actually rubbed off on him and led to him becoming a terrible person in the world, and that he's actually, even though he's at the head of some foundation that saves people's lives, he's destroyed everybody's lives around him, including being such a force for evil that he has helped to bring several hosts to consciousness himself through his deeds, through his utter malevolence, and thus he's been the devil to Robert Ford's God the Father.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that.
Neither had I, and that is actually precisely what the function of the devil is in Milton's Paradise Lost.
To bring to consciousness, yeah.
Yeah, that he brings about a temptation that gets Eve to come to consciousness, which gets Adam to come to consciousness, so that they are free to make their own choices, because choices only matter. This is actually the conclusion that Maps of Meaning comes to, like in page 455 out of 469 by Peterson, that choices only matter if good and evil are real. And then you're utterly responsible for everything you do. And, well, that's what the Man in Black has. Well, he's going to have to chew on that.
That's a lot to chew on.
That's quite a lot to chew on, right? And, that is actually literally what Satan is doing.
Chewing
at the bottom
exactly,
of Dante's
right, yeah.
hell.
I was just going to say.
Three traitors, yeah.
So he basically.
And so that is what we call it. We're chewing on something, where someone's eating at us, right? Or you can't digest. And Milton actually was all about digestion. In fact, thought that he went blind due to not digesting something right, as if he didn't digest. Oh yeah.
I didn't know that.
There was a theory of vapors coming up from the stomach. And if you think about the idea of mental indigestion too, he had some ideas like wanting, believing that kings could be legally killed. He wrote in a regicide pamphlet, and he's one of the first people ever to publicly declare that sort of thing after one of the first ever killings of a king. And so he might have thought that was divine retribution against him. And I don't mean to laugh at that, because, imagine that you wrote something like that was so novel and terrible at the same time.
And then you went blind.
Probably everybody. And then you went blind. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, not such a, that's like getting struck by thunder in the eyes. And it kind of makes sense. And, a lot of the prophets in the Greek tradition, like Tiresias, and let me see, who else am I thinking of? Phineas, and of course Homer, were all blind. And so, that fact wasn't lost on him.
No, I don't think so.
But what's interesting is that, like Oedipus, you had another blind one. And also Polyphemus, who goes blind because of that which he doesn't see. I think the Man in Black is going to have to endure some Oedipal level suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good that he has this Antigone figure beneath him, because perhaps she'll be suffering quite a bit too, because they'll both end up being human but totally inhuman.
Oh man, that's good. Actions. He'll have to make himself blind. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and he has been blind. He has been blind, so yeah, he's going to have to maybe literally go blind.
Yeah, no, that would be good. Now his daughter says, I shouldn't have said that her death was your fault. So that
might have been what made him think she was a host.
Yeah.
Because that's a self-reflective moment. Maybe that's something that would have been too good for him to believe would be true.
Yeah. But it also makes me wonder what, she says that, my mother, she's the one who saw through you. She always knew the truth about you. She always knew there was a darkness to you. But he's not the reason she killed herself. So
well, and something interesting is in the first season when he was first captured by the host with the crown of thorns, the best second or third guy. She's always saying gnarly stuff like, "Oh, we'll just tie them between the trains."
Yeah.
And he says that
what is her name?
He drove his wife crazy until she committed suicide. He was telling that to Lazo, whose name I always forget his actual name, just his function. Lawrence, yes, his traveling companion.
Yeah.
I'm like one of the hosts, forgetting the people I know so well now. Soon I won't know who you are, Mr. Babcock. And or whoever you can't step in the same river twice.
Yeah,
and so so he was saying that he was so cold and distant that his wife committed suicide, and he seemed to trace the causality to himself. And I wonder if that's because of something, if that's because of what his daughter, Emily, said to him. And since he had said that in the Westworld environment, Ford had gotten access to that information and had then produced a host that could forgive him for that so that he could start to learn his ultimate lesson.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
To be determined.
Well, to be determined. And something I want to talk about next time is the actual picture of the maze. I've been looking at that lately because that is
good.
When we post this on YouTube. It is the image we have. And it does have 3 ways to finish, which get increasingly long. And one kind of gets you up near the groin area. One gets you sort of towards the heart area. And the hardest one is to get to the head by the pointing finger, the finger that points at its own head, suggesting that like that there are sort of 3 levels of consciousness, like the tripartite soul of Plato, or even like the tripartite division of the psyche for Freud, the id, the ego, and the superego. The id being the instincts, the ego being the conscious mind, and the superego being the sort of authoritative structure that you receive through the parent and the society, the patriarchal structure, as it would be called. So talking about Freud is getting me off track again here.
The picture, you want to talk about the maze?
Looking at the picture, so the hardest path or the longest path to consciousness seems to be the one to develop the logos, but also the one that you precisely are in control of making happen yourself. That only you can bring about that awakening. That nothing else can. And that's sort of interesting too, because everybody has sort of a reproductive awakening, I would say, like women in a more extreme way than a man, and represented by the myth of Persephone being taken up by the Hades from the earth while she's just pulling daisies. It just happens for women one day. All of a sudden, they can menstruate, and there it is. They're a woman. Men have sort of not a similar awakening, but all of a sudden they can reproduce too. And so that's like sort of a first realization of new forces that are going to act on your consciousness essentially forever. And then sort of the heart one, well, I wonder if that's sort of, whenever you have something to care about, but you don't need to understand why you care about things in order to be responsible for them. And that might be the highest level that most people can get to. But the third one is one that you don't naturally get to. You have to enact it, embody it in order to get there. You have to make the choice to be conscious. It can't just happen to you. It doesn't just rain on you and then you're wet. You have to choose to look at the heavens and realize what's happening.
Right. You don't just have a child and you have a feeling, right?
Right. You don't just look at the heavens either. You look at the hell.
Yeah.
And you look at your own suffering, and that in that suffering, in the alchemists that Carl Jung and Peterson talk about would say, when you look in the feces, that which appears to have the least amount of worth and is grossest and you least want to be near because it disgusts you, and those are your own actions. Well, when you look in those, you derive the gold, the information that you refuse to acknowledge that can help you have a complete perspective on your personality, can actually free you from those evil behaviors, because you can see yourself as sort of a yin yang, as both good and evil. And in seeing that about yourself, you can actually make choices in real time about whether you wish to do good or evil, because you're an actual agent of one or the other because of your consciousness. And that's why I think each of these characters is going to be, well, their goal is going to look very different. Structurally, potentially very similar.
Yeah. Well, the archetype, we've entered into the realm of the archetypes, so they're just
that's right
from the archetypes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're actually doing really good work on the archetypes. And I was thinking about what a conversation like this actually is, and it seems to be an amplification of images. It's sort of like what a literary lecture is, as opposed to a philosophical lecture. It's not just syllogizing. We're amplifying. We're associating ideas with each other, which is, of course, how people learn and how they learn language. And so perhaps the most effective possible way to lecture and to speak. But because We're not just giving outlines to each other when we have a conversation, right?
No.
There's life to it, and there's like sort of a golden snitch which we follow, what's interesting and what grabs our attention. And so we get off on tangents, and it's funny because like early first couple years teachers like are taught that's sort of a flaw, but ultimately I think that's where the real information is. It's like our attention doesn't guide. It's as if it guides itself, because I certainly don't guide it. I mean, it's like we're holding a Ouija board together.
Yeah, I was just thinking the exact same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like we're like thinking the exact same thing, because the situation, we just represent it with the same images in our mind, which shows that we are symbolic creatures that can represent the same situation with even the same symbols. And like that's the sort of creature we are.
Yeah.
And that's funky. That's funky. And, you know, that seems to be what the ultimate message of Aladdin is, right? Like, what do you get out of that genie's lamp in the very beginning? You get an awesome story. Boom. And that's the greatest gift of the genie, and that's the greatest gift that we have, that we can share stories and thus information without direct experience of events. And in a show like this, we can even look into the structure of stories, and thus the structure of ourselves and our own psyches.
Yeah. It is like looking at the architecture of the human soul. Is really
that's
what
right.
This is about.
And I hopefully with a salubrious effect.
Yeah.
And an ennobling effect.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, this could be improved some, so let's set about doing that.
Let's try to be a little more forward and a little less Man in Black.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, you know, it's a quote of the Buddha, so says Jung, that he said in some apocryphal work, if you're going to sin, at least sin consciously. And so that's something the Man in Black's going to have to do. He's going to have to see himself for what he is. And perhaps all of us are, and that's judgment. Well,
all right,
Mr. Babcock,
to wrap up another episode?
Let's wrap up another episode. It's been wonderful having you.
You as well.
All right. Well, until next week.
All right. Until next week, we'll find out what's in the cradle.
Boom.
All right.
From the cradle to the grave. Till next time.